Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Laura. Welcome to another episode of Where Work Meets Life. I'm delighted today to have a very special guest to speak with me about managing your boss, how to succeed, thrive, or know when to leave. Mary Abbajay, an author, speaker, and consultant, is someone I had the pleasure of meeting, and she's a fellow thought leader, a best-selling author of the book Managing Up: How to Move Up, Win at Work, and Succeed with Any Type of Boss. I was intrigued by this book. I literally devoured it. I really appreciated how engaging it was. There's real life stories, proven strategies at the end of every chapter on what to do with different types of bosses, how to make your life better working with different types of bosses, including the difficult ones. And given my current research in North America around toxic bosses in particular, I was really curious to talk to Mary about these different types of difficult bosses, including the toxic ones, and how you make the decision to quit when you've had enough. So we're going to discuss this with gusto. Just a couple of things about Mary. She is the president of the Careerstone Group, a full-service organizational and leadership development consultancy, and she offers a lot of different solutions for businesses and government. Like me, she's also a speaker, a facilitator, trainer, and she has done exceptional work over the years with so many organizations. And she contributes to the media as well: television, radio, the New York Times, HBR, Fast Company, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. The list goes on. Mary is out there sharing this really important information. So welcome to the show, Mary Abbajay.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Dr. Laura. I've been so looking forward to this conversation and to speaking with your listeners about toxic workplaces, how to survive them, how to get out of them, difficult bosses, the whole kit and caboodle. So thank you so much for having me on.
It's my absolute pleasure. So, Mary, it's interesting how you got into this topic, because not everyone chooses to focus on this, and I know myself it takes a lot of energy to be investigating and dealing with the toxic boss topic in particular. But tell us about your book. What inspired you to write it?
Well, it's a funny story, Laura, because I do a lot of facilitation, a lot of consulting. We do your basic organizational development and talent development and leadership development work with our clients. And for so many years, I just kept hearing these people complaining about their bosses all the time. My boss does this, my boss should do that, shoulda, coulda, woulda. And at the same time, I'm hearing the bosses complain about their employees. They don't do this, they don't get that. And I just kept thinking, people, this is not rocket science. All you need to do is have a little bit more understanding of each other and put a little effort into the relationship. So we actually started a workshop about 12 years ago on how to manage up. And then, of course, after a while, Wiley came and asked me to write a book about it. And I said yes. But it was really just born out of my own frustration that people were not taking their workplace relationships. They weren't putting the effort and the intention behind creating really productive and positive workplace relationships.
That is wonderful. Rather than complain, do something about it. Learn how to better work with your boss. And the term managing up, it was funny when I first came across your book. I usually talk about managing up as a sucking up thing, as trying to climb over other people and to get to the top. But that's not what you mean here. So can you explain the difference to us, Mary?
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out, because a lot of people do think that managing up is sucking up. And I have to remind people that sucking up is about being a patsy or a pansy. It's about subjugating yourself, your needs, your wants to somebody else. It's about manipulation is really what it is. But managing up, the way I see it, is about not managing the person, but managing that relationship. It's like taking that power differential and turning it on the side. Because in a relationship, we all have agency, right? We all have advocacy. And so managing up is about making a concerted and intentional, sometimes a strategic effort to build a productive and positive working relationship so that you can succeed, your boss can succeed, and the organization can succeed. And this often comes into play when we're talking about people that have different levels of power, right? Different personalities, perhaps, different perspectives, different priorities, different experiences, different expectations, wants, and needs. So it's about being able to really navigate that so that you can be successful, they can be successful, and the organization can be. Which, by the way, Dr. Laura, does not mean that sometimes you don't have to suck it up, because there are times where you're going to have to interact, collaborate, or communicate with someone that's a little bit out of your preference zone. So for example, if I'm working with a client who's really detail oriented, I might have to suck it up and pay a little bit more attention to the details in order to build that good relationship with them. So it's not about sucking up, it's about managing that relationship.
I love it. And you've done such a great job. I just can't say enough about how you've packaged this and organized this book.
My husband calls it a cookbook. He's like, "It's a cookbook. You have, like, different, like, recipes of bosses and how to deal with them."
Well, here's the thing. I've showed a few people this too, and these different types: the advancer, the harmonizer, the micromanager that we can relate to, and the narcissist, the impulsive boss, the workaholic, the incompetent. There's just so many different types of bosses, and then we get into the truly terrible ones. So. Yeah, it's just so interesting. And where has this book led? What are you most proud of in terms of the impact of this book?
Gosh, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but it's been really powerful for me as well. I don't think a day goes by where I don't get an email or a tweet or a message on LinkedIn from somebody who's either been impacted by the book or is struggling with the manager or in a toxic situation. So that's been really gratifying to hear from readers and people who may have taken a course or see me on like a podcast like yours about how helpful it's been. So that's been really great. It's also been great because it's allowed me the opportunity to do more podcasts, and be on stage and all that. Super fun being in the media. But I think one of the biggest surprises for me has been the reaction from bosses and managers. I was a little worried, Laura, that when this book came out, like they would like have me burning an effigy, But what has happened is so many managers come to me and say, "Oh my goodness, I read through your book and I immediately started thinking, like, who am I? And what's the impact I'm having on my people? Am I a micromanager? Am I too impulsive?" So the fact that the book has led managers and supervisors to reevaluate their management style and their impact on their employees has been really gratifying and surprising.
Yeah, if they can get that open-mindedness and that level of self-insight, super powerful. And a lot of the bosses have bosses themselves, right? Their bosses.
Well, you're right. We all have to manage up. You own your own business. You're managing up to your clients all the time, right? I own my own business. Now we have lots of bosses.
Yeah, and the CEO manages up to the board chair or right? So there's it can really help anyone, this book.
Anybody. And I think the higher you go up in organizations, the less you start thinking about managing up, right? Because you often think, well, I'm at the top, there's, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's really important as managers go through their career as leaders that there's always going to be somebody that you have to manage up to. So it's a skill you want to make sure you don't lose. I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was asked to come to the Pentagon to give a managing up course for a bunch of colonels, new colonels at the Pentagon. And I'm thinking, for goodness sakes, they're colonels. They don't need to manage up. And my contact said, but oh no, these are colonels that were, when they were on their bases, they were all high and mighty and powerful. But when they come into the Pentagon for a detail, they're basically secretaries. So they have forgotten how to manage up. So it was really fun to work with the colonels to remind them how important it is to manage up.
Oh, what a great story. You've had so many adventures in your career, Mary.
It's been fun.
So one of the things that has been coming up in my own toxic boss research and something that you and I had talked about was HR. And so a lot of people who are dealing with a truly difficult, truly toxic type of boss, they contemplate going to HR. And it's really unfortunate that HR is often trapped within the political system. So can you tell us a bit more? Because I feel like you described this really well for people in the book as well.
Yeah, so you're 100% right. So, I would think long and hard before I would go to HR for a toxic boss situation. And it's not that they don't want to help you, they probably do. They may not be empowered to help you because so often, as you so rightly pointed out, they're stuck in a system. And if the system is toxic, they may not have much power. The other thing that goes wrong so I would make sure before I went to HR, I would check out to see how well HR handles situations like the one that you're about to bring them, right? Do a little homework. But the other thing that happens is a lot of the toxicity sits or starts at the very top, right? And so when your C-suite is toxic, when your CEO is toxic, when the owner of the business is toxic, there's very little that HR is going to be able to do to help you. The other thing is a lot of these toxic people tend to be high performers, right? They tend to be like your great salesperson or your rainmaker or somebody. So they're both politically protected or they're, the nephew of the owner. So they're often politically connected and sort of financially protected, if you will. And so organizations have a hard time getting rid of the brilliant jerk or the toxic leader because you know what? She, or they are so good at bringing in whatever they bring in or do that organizations are reluctant to get rid of them. And so HR tends to be a little powerless. That's what I've found. How about you in your research?
Yeah, no, I'm finding the same thing, and in fact, I'm finding in some cases it made it worse for the person, and I don't. The HR is definitely in a really precarious position themselves, and but I've really heard more cases than not where it makes things worse and didn't help.
No, because you're right, because the HR might go to your boss and tell you everything that you just said about them.
Yeah, that's the types of cases I've heard.
And then, of course, Laura, I was just reading in the paper here in DC. It is not uncommon for HR to be part of the problem. It is not uncommon for HR to also have a toxic culture. There's a major federal organization here in DC that currently is going through a toxic review and just so many complaints. And it turns out HR was part of the toxicity. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, I find it very, very sad because I think HR has a very important privileged type of work to really be there for people and protect people's well-being, right? But they're not given the empowerment to do so. It's a real waste. Ugh.
Yeah, and even if HR does have some power, and they have some processes, the wheels of HR can move very slowly. So I'm thinking about you file a complaint, then there has to be an investigation, then it could turn into a very lengthy process, all the while you are still suffering in this toxic situation.
Mhm. And a friend of mine took a toxic boss that she filed a harassment and psychological harassment type claim in court, and I actually went to the court to support her, and he is the chief of HR. So it's
Boom.
like, yeah. So what are you supposed to do? And she did go to the HR was under him, and it just, yeah, it didn't go very well, as you can imagine.
Yeah, no, it really doesn't. And it's just I think people really need to understand um, the danger of the dangerous effects or impacts that toxic workplaces and toxic bosses have on people.
Yeah, let's talk about that. We'll go back and forth. What comes to your mind first?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is just there's been so many studies and research that talks about how it is so detrimental to your physical, your emotional, and your psychological life. Physically speaking, it decimates your immune system, right? So it makes you much more susceptible to colds, flus, stroke. And also, they have shown that serious toxic situations increase your likelihood of heart attack, cardiac events, and stroke by nearly 60%. Like, that's stunning.
It is huge. Yeah, and the mental health impact, massive. I see a lack of confidence, so the person's confidence is slowly eroded, and then they don't end up having the motivation and energy to leave.
You nailed it right there. There's some mental health professionals that compare the toxic boss syndrome with PTSD battered spouse syndrome, and Stockholm syndrome, because it decimates your self-esteem. And it, as you said, then you don't have the oomph to actually save yourself, right? Because you are just trying to survive.
Yeah, I find it just truly terrible. And when you speak about the truly toxic boss versus the difficult but manageable boss. So you have a micromanager, they're difficult. It's a pain in the butt, but you can deal with it with the great strategies in your book, by the way. But where do you draw the line, Mary, between difficult but manageable and truly toxic? You got to get out of there.
Oh, so I love that you asked that because I think people conflate them all the time. If I hear one more person say, I work for a toxic boss, he, she, or they is a micromanager, I'm going to punch them in the face because that is not toxic. That's just difficult. So toxic bosses are annoying and they're frustrating. And you're like, grr. I mean, difficult bosses, they're just frustrating, annoying, and grr. Toxic bosses are a whole nother level. So a toxic boss is really the boss that's going to thrive. They're going to thrive on demeaning, debasing, humiliating. They're the screamers, the shouters. They are the people who are the narcissists. They're the people that bully. They're the people that pit people against each other. They are the people that make you feel sick, that they make you feel demeaned upon, they make you feel invaluable. It's the impact. And it's also the potency and the frequency of their behaviors, right? So someone who yells once in a while, that's wrong. They're idiots. They're jerks, but it doesn't make them toxic. If they yell a lot and they yell frequently, that makes them toxic. So, really understanding what is the potency and the frequency of their behavior and how do you feel. If you find yourself worried about your safety, about your mental health, about your well being, when you can feel that knot in your stomach every day when you're getting ready to go to work, chances are you have a toxic boss. When your friends and family and the people that love you tell you, like, why are you putting yourself through this? Why don't you get out? You have a toxic boss. So those are some of the things I've seen. What has your research shown?
Exactly what you say. It tends to unfold gradually over time. There tend to be warning signs when you look back in hindsight. There were warning signs, or we call them red flags, and it seems to get worse, not better, over time. And yeah, it erodes your sense of self-worth, and it ends up affecting your ability and motivation in your work. So it can almost be a self-fulfilling prophecy too if you let it go on too long. It can damage your productivity and performance in the end. Although a lot of high achievers are able to push through a lot of the dirt to just keep performing, yet they're suffering, they're not sleeping, and when sleep goes, everything goes. You're just such a mess. So I would add that if your sleep is impacted by a toxic boss, you need to seriously reevaluate it and talk to someone who can help you, and not HR.
Yeah, I think I love the sleep thing because I don't know too many people that lose sleep over a micromanager. You might lose sleep for a few minutes, but you're right. When it's impacting your sleep and your sense of worth, then you know it's toxic. And the funny thing is that people will stay work for toxic bosses longer than in other careers. And I've found a couple of reasons for this. One is that people often think that someone's going to come save them. They think, well, someone's going to have to do something about this jerk. Guess what? No one's coming to save you. You got to save yourself. Some people think, well, what if I just try this? Or what if I just try this strategy? And that, of course, doesn't work with a toxic boss. Some people think that they're going to stay in this toxic place because the devil they know is better than the devil they don't know, right? Or they worked really hard to get that corner office or get this job. They're not going to give it up now. Or they think, or sometimes they just think that they can outlast the toxic boss. But all of these, all of these reasons aren't really helping you thrive. Like you can survive a toxic boss, but you're never going to thrive under a toxic boss. So it's really about understanding how long you grit and when it's time to quit.
Oh, that is great the way you said that. How long you grit and when it's time to quit.
When it's time to quit. And, you'll find a lot more toxic leaders and toxic cultures in what we call high meaning careers, or high meaning fields. This is where the work that they're doing is so important to somebody that they'll put up with a bad culture. And these are things like law, medicine, politics, and education.
Are you ready to transform your life through laughter, lifelong learning, and a little bit of improv magic? Well, get ready because the Improve It podcast with Erin Diel is here to add a dose of playfulness to your Wednesdays. Erin sits down with development gurus to explore the pesky and beautiful aspects of life. They dive deep into things that make us tick, laugh, and sometimes even cringe. Above all, Erin's mission is to remind you that no one is you, and that is your superpower. But here's the twist. With over 13 years of improv experience, Erin infuses every episode with a playful spirit. Get ready for tangible techniques to transform yourself through the power of play. You can find the link to the Improve It podcast in my show notes, or go to learntoimproveit.com, Apple or Spotify, and subscribe today. I totally have seen the same thing with high meaning careers where toxic bosses seem to make their way in. Foundations, nonprofits, healthcare. For goodness sakes, an organization in healthcare is allowing toxic bosses to damage people's health. It doesn't make any sense.
It's crazy. And I love that you mentioned nonprofits because that is another one. We all expect nonprofit leaders or nonprofit organizations to be all lovey-dovey, warm, human-centered, and they're not. I was just talking to my doctor the other day, and we were talking about this, and she said, "Well, when you go through residency as a doctor, like they treat you like shit. So like we're used to being bullied and so we just ignore it and then it just perpetuates itself." So I thought that was kind of a funny take on it. That is part of the culture from the very beginning.
Oh, dear. And then you get people going into it that are empathic and very sensitive, and they get into these environments and they just want to help other people. And then they're dealing with, snakes in the office. I don't know why I like the snake analogy.
Well, because you know what? You think about snakes and you think about like they're devious. We think they are, but like they kind of represent the first sin, right? If you go kind of biblical on it. And so of course it's a very it's a very unhuman thing to do.
It really is. And I know you said the yellers and the screamers, and there are those, but I'm also seeing a lot of passive aggressive behaviors that are very back channel, underhanded, and gradually erode the person without necessarily yelling.
I think that is a big problem. And, when people say passive aggressive, sometimes people who are passive aggressive just are conflict averse, but sometimes it's more nefarious. Like, I'm just going to undermine you for all sorts of reasons. And that going behind your back and back channeling and undermining you and often excluding you, that is definitely toxic behavior.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The exclusionary behaviors, using things as a threat, like not supporting your development, going to conferences, like leaving you out of the loop and not funding what you need. I see that too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I always tell people that, don't give up an opportunity to learn from a difficult boss because a difficult boss can teach us a lot about ourselves. It can teach us a lot about good boss mechanics or behaviors. But a toxic boss, the only thing you should learn about a toxic boss is how to get out.
Exactly. And I see a lot of people regret that they stayed as long as they did. And that when I ask, what do you have as advice for other people? They always say, get out sooner.
Yeah. I love that you said that because whenever I give talks on that include the toxic boss, I will always ask the audience, how many of you wish you had stayed longer? Nobody raises their hand, because of what I want people to realize is there's research that shows that it takes upwards of 2 years to recover fully emotionally and psychologically from a toxic boss. And I actually think that's a conservative number because I've talked to people where it's taken them 3, 4, 5 years to recover. And the longer you stay with a toxic boss, the longer you are breathing in that poison, the deeper impact it's going to have on you, and the longer it will take you to recover. So I really encourage people to do what they can to get out. Protect yourself while you're there by whatever means you can, but you do need to start planning your exit.
Yeah, and then again, like you said so well earlier, you think, well, the organization's going to get rid of this person because other people have left, right? But it's not often happening because of the political variables, and oftentimes they're still there. So the person leaves, and that boss is still there doing damage to other people, and it's really sad. But it'll all come back to them, I believe. I really believe in karma, I do, but it's not your responsibility to solve. Karma will solve it.
I we can only hope, right? But we also have to realize that most people, the majority of people in North America work for what's called small business, right? For employers under 500 people, and these are not probably going to have really robust HR. Like you're almost better off if you're working for a publicly traded company because at least you can go to the press and the media at some point. That could help. But no one cares about, Karen's air conditioning company or, that employs 50 people. There's no other outside resource to help you unless you go into it like a legal resource.
Completely. Really, really well said. I was just curious about another thing. So you have a chapter on the narcissist. And I did a few episodes on narcissism about a year and a half ago. But with a narcissist, can they be manageable? Because a lot of times narcissists can be very toxic. But how do help people decide where they are manageable and how versus get the hell out?
Yeah, I love that you said that because you're right. Narcissism is a spectrum, right? So a little bit of narcissism is totally doable. Like narcissists also tend to be very successful. Even a medium amount of narcissism is going to be manageable. It's when it gets to that extreme narcissism. I don't know if your listeners will remember, but in the United States of America, we had an extreme narcissist hold a very high public office.
I've never heard of that.
Never heard of that, right? And look at the chaos that created. So when the narcissism is so high that it's all about them, that they are not open to what's good for the organization or good for the greater good or good for the people, when everything has to be couched in a way that is making them look good or feel good or all powerful, then that's a losing situation. And that's when the shifting of what matters shifts way too far towards that one individual. And organizations are systems, right? And systems need to worry about the system as well. And a system is created of different parts that all have to thrive and be healthy and work well together. And that extreme narcissism is going to shift the balance too much, and bad things will happen.
Yes, well put. Wow, we could talk for so long. I just love talking to you, and I love the work that you've done here, and really helped so many people, Mary.
Well, you're so kind. And I am so excited about the work that you're doing on toxic and the research you're doing on toxic cultures. I think the time is right. I think we need to raise the red flag. And I think people really need to know, and leaders really need to understand how dangerous and how wrong it is to allow toxic people or toxic cultures to exist or even to thrive.
Totally agree. And another interesting thing is the whole pandemic and how that, allowed toxic bosses to fester and how they went about their ways when it wasn't face to face. So I'm really learning a lot about that too.
I can't wait to read more of your research.
It's interesting, but it's sad. Are you continuing to do more work in this arena? Like, are you finding that toxicity continues to be on the rise in your speaking and your consulting?
Yeah, it always surprises me. In big groups what percentage of people have had a toxic situation, and it's really stunning to me. In any given group, I would say between 20 and 60% of people have had an experience with something toxic. A few of those will be like, "Oh, it was easy. I just laughed." But most people, it's a real problem, and I think it's a problem that we're not talking about. I think that things like Me Too helped carve the way for people to talk about toxic workplaces. So I think that's been really helpful. I think people now are talking about it. There's more awareness. But as you said, I just want to make sure that we are separating difficult bosses from toxic bosses because it's easy to dismiss a micromanager. That's fine. But when we lump them together, I think I fear we don't take the toxic seriously enough.
I think you're That's probably the most aha moment of this conversation. You're absolutely absolutely right. The difficult ones are difficult, but you can learn how to navigate them, and you may not want to work with them forever, but you can learn from them. You can learn about more about how what type of boss you want to be, and you can help them shine, and you can actually end up developing a solid relationship with them. Toxic bosses? No way. No way.
No way. Not worth it.
So, Mary, I get the sense you're an avid learner. You're always developing and learning. What do you read or listen to for your own growth and development lately? So, we love book or podcast recommendations.
Well, I have to confess on my reading habits, I'm an old English major, right? So I'm an old literature major. So most of the books that I read really are literature. So because I love reading about the human condition from in beautiful novels and things like that. So so we'll leave it there for that. But for listening, the podcast, I think one of my favorite podcasts is a podcast. I think it's done by NPR. How I Made This, and it's such a great podcast. It's all they talk to all these like business owners and innovators about how they brought their product to fruition and to success. And I love it because, we look at other people and we say, oh my God, that Dr. Laura, she's so successful. She's so lucky. And you talk to these people and you learn about their journey and the grit and the resiliency and like the self belief they had to do to accomplish it. I always find it just fascinating, interesting, and really inspiring.
Oh, wonderful. We'll definitely share that in the show notes, along with managing up and how to get your hands on that beautiful book. It has a purple hot air balloon on it, so you can't miss it. It's on Audible as well. Is it in any other languages yet, Mary?
I think it's in Chinese, but I'm not really sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know they signed they made a deal with a Chinese distributor, but I love my publisher, but they don't tell me anything until after it's happened.
Gotcha. Here's a question I sometimes ask my guests. If you didn't need to sleep and you had that time back, what else would you do?
All right, here's confession time. I would actually spend time with my friends and family. I am a workaholic. I work all the time and I'm out of balance in that way. So if I didn't need to sleep, I would spend much more time with friends and family. I would go have more fun.
Okay, you got to listen to my last episode. It's on workaholism, and she just put out a book called Never Not Working.
Okay, that sounds like me. All right, I'm gonna have to check that out.
Harvard Press. She's a professor of organizational psychology like me, and it's really interesting, all the dimensions of workaholism, and I wanted to really get a sense of what's the latest going on here, right? So I think you'll find it useful because we know it's not the best scenario.
Guilty.
But yeah, I fall prey to that too because when you're passionate about what you do and there's always more to be done, and you thrive with what you do, it's really hard not to be.
I know. I agree. And I love what I do. Like you love what you do. It's endlessly fascinating and it's helpful to the world. So that's my excuse for being a workaholic.
So let's talk about the world because the world is pretty challenging these days, but I would argue that it's always been challenging. But in particular, if you could have one wish for a better world when it comes to workplaces, what would it be?
Kindness. I think the world needs to be a little bit more kind. I think we could be more kind to each other. I think we could be more kind to ourselves. I think we could be more kind to our colleagues, our spouses, the strangers on the street, the people on the bus, on the subway, on the metro. And kindness isn't just about being nice. Kindness, I mean, nice is about us, really. We want to just make things nice for us. But kindness is taking an intentional effort to do something kind, helpful, or generous to another person just because. And I just think we don't have very much kindness these days.
That really inspired me, and I hope that it inspires the listeners and viewers to go out and do one kind thing today to bring some joy to someone else's life because it is a challenging world that we're all navigating together. So, thank you, Mary, for being on Where Work Meets Life and for all that you've shared today and that you've shared through the book. And I'm really excited to hear what the viewers think of this episode.
Well, Dr. Laura, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I've had a great time and I just cannot wait to read more of your research. So, you are doing great work out there. Keep it up and I hope that we could talk again soon.
I hope so as well. Take care, Mary. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate and review the episode and share with others who may benefit. Visit me on my website at drlaura.live and sign up for my monthly e-newsletter full of tips and resources. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would be delighted to speak with you on your speaking needs. Stay well.